The dust clouds rose like spirits from the hard-packed earth as Clara Whitmore stepped down from the stagecoach, her worn leather boots touching ground she hadn't felt beneath her feet in 7 long years. Millbrook looked smaller than she remembered, though. Main Street narrower, the buildings more weathered by sun and time, but the mountains still rose like ancient guardians beyond the town's edge, their purple peaks catching the last light of day. Just as they had when she was 19 and believed the world held nothing but promise, she pulled her shawl tighter. Around her shoulders, not from cold, but from something deeper, trembling that started in her chest and spread outward like ripples on still water. Somewhere in this town was the man she'd left behind. The man whose letters had stopped coming 3 years ago. The man who thought she was dead. Clara had every reason to turn around, to climb back into that dust-covered coach and disappear into the vastness of the frontier once more. But her heart, stubborn and aching, kept her feet planted on Millbrook's Main Street as the sun painted everything golden and the shadows grew long. She had come home to set things right, even if it killed her. 7 years earlier, Clara had been Clara McKinnon, the banker's daughter with laughing eyes and dreams as wide as the prairie sky. She'd been engaged to Thomas Whitmore, the sheriff's son, a man whose gentle hands could calm a spooked horse or trace the curve of her cheek with equal tenderness. They'd planned a spring wedding, a little house by the creek, children who would grow up knowing the freedom of open spaces and the security of love. But love, Clara had learned, was no match for the harsh realities of frontier life. The McKinnon Bank had been robbed on a cold February morning, her father shot down in his own office by men whose faces were hidden behind bandanas and whose hearts were hidden behind greed. Clara had arrived just in time to see them fleeing, just in time to cradle her dying father's head in her lap as his blood soaked into her blue wool dress. The money, he'd whispered, his eyes already growing dim, hidden, ... behind the ... family. Portrait. Take it and run, Clara girl. They'll come for you. Think you know their names. She'd wanted to stay, wanted to marry Thomas, and face whatever came with his strong arms around her and his steady presence beside her. But that very night, as she'd lain sleepless in her childhood bed, a brick had come crashing through her window, with a note tied around it: "Leave town or join your father." Clara had made the hardest choice of her life. She'd taken the hidden money enough to keep her alive, but not enough to make her wealthy, and she'd disappeared into the darkness before dawn, leaving behind only a hastily scrawled note for Thomas. "I have to go. I'm sorry. Please don't follow me. Please don't wait for me." She'd become Clara Whitmore in her heart that night, taking his name even though they'd never made it to the altar, carrying it like a secret promise across year's end. Miles now standing in the dying light of a western evening, she wondered if that promise had any meaning left. The Silver Dollar Saloon looked the same as ever, its batwing doors swinging gently in the evening breeze, as the sound of a piano drifting out into the street, along with the low murmur of voices and the clink of glasses. Clara knew that if Thomas was still in town, still unmarried, she'd find him there. It had always been his habit to stop by for one drink after his rounds, to talk with the men and keep his ear to the ground. Her hands trembled as she pushed through the doors, her eyes adjusting to the amber glow of oil lamps and the haze of cigarette smoke. The piano player, still old Charlie, she noticed with a pang, was picking out a melancholy tune that seemed to echo the ache in her chest. A few heads turned her way, curious but not recognition in their eyes. She'd changed, she knew. 7 years of hardship had carved lines around her eyes, had taken the softness from her cheeks and replaced it with something sharper, more weathered. But then she saw him, and her breath caught in her throat like a wild bird suddenly caged. Thomas sat at a corner table, his broad shoulders hunched. Over a glass of whiskey, his dark hair longer than she remembered and touched with silver at the temples. He was still beautiful to her, still the man she dreamed about, in lonely hotel rooms and cramped boarding houses across 3 territories. But there was something different about him, too. Heaviness in the set of his shoulders, a darkness around his eyes that hadn't been there when they were young and foolish. And convinced that love could conquer anything, Clara stood frozen in the doorway, suddenly terrified that this moment, the one she'd been moving toward for 7 years, might destroy whatever remained of the love they'd once shared. But Thomas looked up then, as if some instinct had told him he was being watched. His eyes met hers across the smoky room. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the wooden floor with a sound like breaking hearts. The piano fell silent. Conversation stopped. In that stretched moment, Clara saw everything she'd lost reflected in Thomas's face. The young man who'd picked wildflowers for her hair, who'd promised her forever under a canopy of stars, who'd waited by her front door for 3 days after she'd disappeared, refusing to believe she was really gone. Clara. His voice was hoarse, barely audible over the sudden thunder of her heartbeat. She nodded. Not trusting herself to speak, Thomas rose from his chair like a man in a dream, his movements slow and careful as if she might vanish again. He moved too quickly. The saloon seemed to hold its breath as he crossed the room, his boots echoing on the wooden floor, his eyes never leaving her face. When he stopped in front of her, so close she could smell the familiar scent of leather and soap and something that was purely him, Clara finally found her voice. "Hello, Thomas. You're supposed to be dead," he said, and there was a world of pain in those 5 words. "I got word 3 years ago, cholera," they said, "in Denver." Clara closed her eyes, understanding flooding through her. Ill in Denver, had nearly died, in fact, but she'd recovered, had been too weak and ashamed to write, too afraid that Thomas had moved on. Apparently someone had gotten the wrong information. Had sent word of her death when she'd been fighting for her life in a charity hospital bed. "I'm not dead," she whispered, opening her eyes to find his gaze burning into her. "I'm here." Why? The single word held years of anguish, of unanswered questions, of sleepless nights and hollow mornings. "Why did you leave? Oh, why didn't you explain? Why didn't you trust me enough to let me help?" The words she'd rehearsed 1,000 times on the long journey home scattered like leaves in the wind. How could she explain the fear that had driven her away? Could she make him understand that leaving him had been the most selfless thing she'd ever done, even though it had felt like tearing her own heart from her chest? "I was protecting you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "They would have killed you too." "Who?" Thomas's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Who threatened you, Clara? Why didn't you tell me?" But before she could answer, the saloon doors burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. 3 men strode in, their spurs jangling, their hands resting casually on their gun belts.
Ow.
Clara's blood turned to ice as she recognized the leader, Jake Morrison, older now and more dangerous looking, but unmistakably one of the men who'd killed her father. Morrison's eyes swept the room and landed on her with the force of a physical blow.
Ow.
A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Well, he drawled, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent saloon. "If it ain't little Clara McKinnon, back from the dead. You always were a stubborn thing, Clara girl. Should have stayed dead." Thomas stepped in front of her, his hand moving to his gun. "You know this man, Clara?" "He's one of them," she whispered, her voice shaking. "One of the men who killed my father." The silence in the saloon was deafening now. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Morrison and his men spread out, blocking the exit, their intentions clear. "See, Thomas," Morrison said, his voice conversational despite the danger radiating from him. "Your lady friend here saw something she shouldn't have seen, heard something she shouldn't have heard. We thought we'd taken care of the problem when she ran off like a scared rabbit, but then we heard she might be coming back. Can't have loose ends, you understand." Thomas's gun was in his hand now, though Clara hadn't seen him draw it. "You'll have to go through me." Morrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, I plan to. See, you've been poking around, asking questions about that bank robbery. Getting too close to the truth. Figure it's time to clean house properly." "What truth?" Clara asked, though part of her already knew, had always suspected that it wasn't just a random robbery, sweetheart. Your daddy was getting close to discovering that someone in this town was cooking the books, skimming money off the top. Someone respectable, someone trusted. Morrison's smile turned vicious. Someone who couldn't afford to have an honest banker asking too many questions. Clara's mind raced. Pieces of a puzzle she'd been carrying for 7 years finally clicking into place. Her father had been worried about discrepancies in the accounts, had mentioned his concerns to her just days before his death, she'd thought. It was just his natural caution, his banker's attention to detail, but it had been so much more. "Who?" she demanded. "Who ordered my father's death?" But Morrison just smiled. Dead people don't need to know the details. The next few moments happened with a strange slow-motion clarity that comes with mortal danger. Morrison's hand dropped to his gun. Thomas shouted her name. Clara threw herself sideways, crashing into a table as gunfire erupted around her. When the smoke cleared and the ringing in her ears began to fade, Clara found herself on the floor behind an overturned table. Thomas crouched beside her with blood seeping through his shirt sleeve. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands running over her frantically, checking for wounds. "I'm fine," she managed, though her entire body was shaking. "You're bleeding. Just a graze." Thomas helped her to her feet, his eyes scanning the saloon. Morrison and one of his men lay motionless on the floor. The third man was nowhere to be seen. "He got away," Thomas said grimly, "which means this isn't over." Clara leaned against him, feeling the solid strength of his body, breathing in the scent that meant safety and home and everything she'd been running from for 7 years. "Thomas, I'm sorry. Should have told you everything from the beginning. I should have trusted you." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. "You were scared. You were protecting me. I understand that now. But Clara, ... his voice broke slightly. "I thought I'd lost you forever. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "I know," she whispered, "because I lost you too. Every day, Thomas. Every single day." They made their way to Thomas's house through the back streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where the surviving gunman might be watching. Clara's heart clenched as they approached the little white cottage by the creek, their cottage, the one they'd planned to share as husband and wife. It looked exactly as she'd imagined it would, with a wide porch and flower boxes under the windows. A garden plot ready for spring planting inside. The house was neat but sparse, with the lonely feeling of a place where only one person lived. Thomas led her to the kitchen, where he began heating water for his wound, his movements efficient and familiar. Clara watched him work, memorizing every detail, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the concentration in his dark eyes, the careful way he rolled up his sleeve to examine the bullet graze. "Let me," she said softly, moving to take the cloth from his hands. For a moment, they were both still, her fingers touching his, 7 years of separation and pain suspended in the space between them. Then Thomas nodded, settling into a chair, and letting her tend to his wound. Her hands were gentle as she cleaned the blood away, as careful as if she were handling something precious and fragile, which she supposed she was. This moment, this quiet intimacy, was precious beyond measure. It was also fragile. One wrong word, one careless move, and it might shatter like spun glass. "Tell me about the letters," she said finally, not looking up from her work. "You said they stopped 3 years ago." Thomas was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with old pain. "Wrote to you every week for 4 years. General delivery, Denver, just like you asked in your first letter. You wrote back maybe a dozen times, always brief, always saying you were safe, but couldn't come home yet. Then nothing. For months, I kept writing, kept hoping. Then word came that you'd died of cholera." Clara's hand stilled on the bandage. She was wrapping around his arm. "I got sick," she said quietly. "So sick I thought I was going to die. When I recovered, I was afraid you'd found someone else, afraid too much time had passed, afraid I'd lost the right to come back." "Clara." Thomas caught her chin, tilting her face up until she had to meet his eyes. "Do you see a wedding ring on my finger? Do you see any sign that another woman lives in this house?" She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "I never stopped waiting for you," he said simply. "Never stopped hoping you'd come home. Never stopped loving you." The words broke something open inside her, something she'd kept carefully locked. "Away for 7 years," she sobbed then. Great shuddering sobs that came from the deepest part of her soul. And Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her as tightly as if he could bind her to him forever. "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "I never stopped. Not for a single day." They held each other in the lamplight kitchen. Two people who'd been walking in darkness, finally finding their way back to the light. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and reminding them that danger still lurked in the shadows. But for this moment, they were together, and that was enough. The attack came at dawn, just as the first pale light was creeping across the sky. Clara woke to the sound of breaking glass and Thomas cursing as he rolled out of bed, gun already. In his hand, they'd spent the night in separate rooms. Propriety still mattered, even in the face of mortal danger, but Clara had barely slept, listening for sounds of trouble. "Stay down," Thomas ordered, but Clara was already moving, grabbing her own pistol from her travel bag. She'd learned to shoot during her years on the road, had become quite good at it out of necessity. The remaining gunmen from Morrison's crew had brought friends. Clara could hear at least 3 different voices shouting outside, could see the flicker of torches through the windows. They were planning to burn the house down around them. "Back door," Thomas said grimly. But even as he spoke, they heard the sound of splintering wood from that direction too. They were surrounded. Clara's mind raced, cataloging their options. The root cellar too obvious, the barn too far away. But there was another possibility, something she remembered from their courting days, when Thomas had shown her every inch of the property with the proud enthusiasm of a young man in love. "The creek," she said suddenly. "Remember? There's that overhang where the bank's been washed out. We can get there through the back window of the pantry." Thomas nodded, understanding immediately. They'd hidden there once during a sudden thunderstorm, had kissed for the first time under that earthy overhang while rain drummed on the creek and lightning lit up the sky. Moving quickly and quietly, they made their way to the narrow pantry window. Thomas went first, dropping down to the muddy creek bank and then helping Clara down. The water was shockingly cold, but they waded upstream in the pre-dawn darkness. The sound of their movement masked by the babble of flowing water behind them. Orange light bloomed against the sky as the house caught fire. Clara bit back a cry, of grief not just for the house itself, but for everything it had represented. Their dreams, their future, the life they'd planned together. "We'll build another one," Thomas said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Bigger, better, with a room for children and a wide porch for watching sunsets." Clara squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his unwavering optimism. His refusal to let their enemies steal their hope, along with their home. They huddled under the creek bank overhang as the sun rose, waiting for the sounds of pursuit to fade. Thomas cleaned his rifle while Clara reloaded her pistol, both of them grim-faced and determined. The time for running was over. The time for answers had come. "We need to find out who really ordered the robbery," Clara said. "Morrison is dead, but his boss is still out there, still dangerous." Thomas nodded. "I've had my suspicions for years. Someone with access to the bank records. Someone who knew your father's routines. Someone who could hire killers without raising questions. Who? Judge Brennan." The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Judge Brennan had been a family friend, had eaten Sunday dinner at their table, had bounced her on his knee when she was small. He'd even offered to oversee the investigation into her father's death. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Not yet. But I've been watching him, and there are things that don't add up. Expensive things he shouldn't be able to afford on a judge's salary. Trips to San Francisco that he claims are legal business, but seem more like pleasure. And he's been very interested in keeping the bank robbery case closed." Clara felt sick, but she also felt something else, a burning need for justice, for truth, for an end to the running and hiding and fear. "What do we do?" Thomas checked his rifle one more time, then met her eyes. "We get proof, and then we make him pay." The abandoned mine shaft 3 miles outside of town had been their destination, the place where Morrison had bragged to his men about hiding the judge's little insurance policy, whatever that meant. Clara and Thomas had overheard enough of the gunman's conversation. The night before, to piece together this much, Brennan had kept something that could incriminate him. probably as protection in case Morrison ever tried to blackmail him. The mine was a relic from Millbrook's early days, when dreams of silver had drawn prospectors like moths to a flame. Most had found nothing but rock and heartbreak, but a few had struck it rich before the veins played out. Now the shafts were dangerous, liable to collapse without warning. Home to rattlesnakes and things best left undisturbed. Clara held the torch while Thomas examined the mine entrance, looking for signs of recent activity. The wooden support beams were rotting. The metal tracks that had once carried her carts were rusted and broken, but their fresh footprints in the dust and something else. "Look," Thomas said, pointing to a section of the mine wall where the stones had been recently disturbed. Working together, they pulled away the loose rocks, revealing a metal box hidden in a natural crevice. Inside the box was a collection of documents that made Clara's blood run cold. Bank records showing systematic theft over several years, receipts for payments to known criminals, and most damning of all, a letter in Judge Brennan's own handwriting, ordering her father's death. "I can't afford to have McKinnon asking questions," the letter read. "Handle it permanently, but make it look like a robbery. The girl, too, if she becomes a problem." Clara's hands shook as she read her own death warrant, signed by a man she'd trusted, a man her family had welcomed into their home. "We have him," Thomas said grimly. "This is enough to hang him." But even as he spoke, they heard voices echoing from the mine entrance. Brennan himself appeared, flanked by two armed men Clara didn't recognize. The judge looked older than she remembered, his hair completely white now, his face lined with the weight of his crimes, but his eyes were as cold as winter ice. "Miss McKinnon," he said pleasantly, as if they were meeting at a church social. "Thomas, I was hoping it wouldn't come to this." "It's over, Judge," Thomas said, his rifle trained on the older man. "We have the evidence. Everyone will know what you did." Brennan smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Clara had ever seen. "Evidence? You mean this?" He held up a small sack, probably gunpowder. Clara realized with growing dread. "I'm afraid there's going to be a tragic mining accident. Two young lovers, overcome by emotion, venture into an unsafe mine. The walls collapse. Very sad, but these old shafts are so unpredictable." The two hired guns spread out, blocking any chance of escape. Clara felt the walls of the mine shaft pressing in around her, felt 7 years of running and hiding in fear, crystallizing into this single moment of truth. But Thomas wasn't finished fighting. "You killed her father," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the enclosed space. "An innocent man who never hurt anyone, who spent his life helping this community. And for what? Money." "For survival," Brennan snapped, his composure cracking. "Do you think a judge's salary is enough to maintain the lifestyle this town expects? Do you think I could hold my position without the right clothes, the right connections, the right image?" "I did what I had to do." "You destroyed lives," Clara said, finding her voice at last. "My father's life, Thomas's life, my life, all four. Your precious image. Your father was going to ruin me. He was asking too many questions, getting too close to the truth. I had no choice." "There's always a choice," Thomas said quietly. "You chose money over honor, greed over justice, murder over integrity." The judge's face twisted with rage. "Enough. I won't be lectured by a small-town sheriff and a dead woman. Light the fuse, boys. Let's end this charade." One of the gunmen struck a match, moving toward the sack of explosives. Clara raised her pistol, knowing it was hopeless, knowing they were all going to die in this cold, dark hole in the ground. But she was done running, done hiding, done letting evil men make decisions about her life. She fired. The gunman with the match screamed and dropped it, clutching his wounded hand. The match went out, but not before it ignited some loose gunpowder. On the ground, flames raced across the mine floor in a pattern of deadly light. "The dynamite!" Thomas shouted, tackling Clara to the ground just as the main charge exploded. The world went white, then black, then red with pain and the taste of blood and dust. Clara felt the mountain falling around them, felt Thomas's body covering hers, protecting her even as the mine shaft collapsed. She heard screaming hers, or someone else's. She couldn't tell him then. There was only silence and darkness. In the weight of 1,000 tons of rock, Clara woke to sunlight and the sound of voices calling her name. Her body felt like it had been trampled by a herd of cattle, but she was alive, lying on a stretcher outside the mine, with half the town gathered around her. Dr. Morrison, no relation to the dead gunman? She remembered dimly, was checking her pulse and looking worried. "Thomas," she croaked, trying to sit up. "Easy there," the doctor said, pressing her gently back down. "You've got a nasty bump on the head and enough bruises to paint a sunset, but nothing's broken that won't heal. Where's Thomas?" Dr. Morrison smiled. "Arguing with me about staying in bed. Same as you. He's got a broken leg and some cracked ribs, but he'll live to annoy me another day." Relief flooded through Clara like cool water in the desert. The judge. The doctor's expression grew grim. Dead. Him and his hired guns. Crushed when the mine collapsed. "Thomas managed to get you both out through a side tunnel before the hole? Thing came down. Lucky that boy knows these mountains like the back of his hand." Clara closed her eyes, feeling something she'd almost forgotten: peace. It was over, really, truly over. Judge Brennan was dead, his crimes exposed, her father's. Killer brought to justice. She was free. More than that, she was home. 3 months later, Clara stood on the porch of their new house, bigger than the first one, as Thomas had promised, with a wide veranda perfect for watching sunsets and a garden plot already planted. With tomatoes and beans and sunflowers, Thomas sat in a rocking chair beside her, his broken leg propped up on a wooden stool, his rifle across his knees. Not because they were in danger those days were over, but because old habits died hard. The wedding had been simple, held in the church where they'd originally planned to marry 7 years earlier. Half the town had come, eager to celebrate. The love story that had survived separation, danger, and near death. Clara had worn her mother's dress, altered to fit her slightly more mature figure, and carried wildflowers that Thomas had picked himself despite his injuries. Now, she was truly Clara Whitmore, no longer hiding behind a name that wasn't hers, no longer afraid to claim the identity she'd carried in her heart through all the dark years. "Do you ever wonder what might have been different?" she asked, watching the sun paint the mountains purple and gold. "If I'd stayed, if I'd trusted you from the beginning." Thomas reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple gold band on her finger. "I used to," he said. "Drove myself half crazy with it, actually. But now I think maybe we needed those 7 years. Maybe we needed to lose each other to really understand what we had." Clara smiled, leaning into his shoulder. "You think we're stronger for it?" "I know we are. We've been tested by fire, Clara girl. It's by separation and fear and violence and loss. And we're still here, still together, still choosing each other every single day." A warm breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of sage and new grass and the promise of rain. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song. Clara felt Thomas's arm tighten around her, felt the solid warmth of him, the absolute certainty of his presence beside her. She thought of her father then, and how proud he would be to see her happiness. She thought of all the lonely nights in strange towns, all the miles walked with an aching heart, all the mornings she'd woken up wishing she was brave enough to come home. It had all led to this moment, this man, this life they were building, together from love and determination and the stubborn refusal to let the darkness win. "Thomas? I'm glad I came home." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, gentle and sure as sunrise. "I'm glad you came home, too. Welcome back, Mrs. Whitmore." Clara smiled, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. She was home at last, in the arms of the man she loved, under the vast western sky that had always called to her heart. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, full of promise and possibility, and for the first time in 7 years, Clara Whitmore wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She was ready for it, whatever it was, as long as Thomas was beside her to meet it. In the distance, the mountains stood sentinel over their happiness, ancient and eternal as love itself. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying stories of all the hearts that had found their way home across the frontier's wide spaces, and under the endless canopy of stars, Two souls who had wandered long in the wilderness finally found their rest. The heart's horizon, Clara thought, wasn't a place you could see on any map. It was the moment when love conquered fear, when courage overcame doubt, when two people decided that whatever came next, they would face it together. She had found her horizon at last. The end.